cloth is something that every human being understands, but at the same time, it's the way I use it, the way I make it, is something that people aren't familiar with. It's this place to kind of insert a collective understanding, a place to begin, and then move towards questions of like, well, what am I actually looking at? So the cloth is my substrate, and then in my figurative work, I use the body as an indicator of emotional or psychological experience. My work uses process as metaphorical content, and when I'm creating these figures, they're actually embedded into the cloth. So I find that really interesting as this kind of way to talk about our connection to our environment, our fragility, and then our strength and structure as well. So you have this cloth that people understand, and then within it you have a kind of vague or mysterious figure. So that's a place where collective understanding becomes a subjective interpretation. There's a lot of math that happens in order to determine what the warp threads, which are the threads that go through the body of the loom, are going to look like. So I start with cones of thread, and then those get laid out on a warping board. In laying that out, I collect the entire quantity of my warp, which would be for, say, a 36-inch wide ink blot piece. It might be something like 520 individual threads are going to go through the loom. And each of those individual threads will be, say, 15 yards long. So that's how much thread we're dealing with. So that all gets measured out, and then it gets taken over to the loom. And every single thread goes through a hole in a beater, and then through an individual eye hole in the body of the loom. That thread is then connected to heddles which move up and down, opening and closing the cloth as I weave. So once that warp is on the loom, then I can paint it, weave it, unweave it, and reweave it. So when you see an ink blot that I've made, it's not a perfect mirroring. There are shifts that happen in the vertical and horizontal direction because of the process of taking it off the loom, the movement of the thread as it's put back on. So it's this collaboration between my intention and my tool. And I'm really interested in that moment of shifting and kind of what that brings to the work, that like intense amount of control that I have, but then letting go in certain areas. My biggest piece so far took me about 8 months. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint, and that slow process reveals itself in the kind of mood of my work. And I think the idea of time also goes back to this desire I have underneath all of the individual concepts of the work, is this desire for people to slow down and look at the work. Beneath everything, there's that desire for mindfulness, which is, present in me as I'm making the work, that meditative, repetitive action of weaving, and then it's presented again in the finished work.